Hi everyone, thanks for joining Onyx Loves Airplanes. My name is Marina and we're going to be going over the private pilot ACS. I'm a student pilot. I fly in New Jersey and I'm working towards my private pilot license. And this is kind of the last step that I need to complete, going over the check ride. So we're doing some check ride prep stuff right now to get prepared for it. So we'll get started. The first thing that I want to show you is the actual physical ACS. And the ACS is the Airman Certification Standards. It is a rubric that the DPE, your designated pilot examiner, will use to test you on. This is the ACS. I'll scroll to the top so you can see what it looks like. This is the document. It was last updated in November of 2023. And you can buy a physical copy of it. A lot of the times flight schools will sell this. I have a physical copy. I like writing and things. If you want to use the online version, that it's exactly the same. It just depends on your learning style. So I don't know where I scroll to. But there's different areas of operation, and there's a couple of differences. Like, this is an 87-page document, but some pages are completely irrelevant if you're working on your private pilot, airplane, single engine land license. If you're working on multi, not relevant. If you're working on a seaplane, not relevant. So this document might seem a little bit overwhelming, but it's really not that bad. You just have to know what is relevant to you and then where to look. I'd also like to point out, I'll point this out in a later video as well, I've been doing my training in a Cessna 172, so the questions that come up later regarding airplane specific things or systems will be particular to the Cessna 172S. It's not going to matter for this first topic. So area of operation 1, pre-flight preparation. This is kind of things you need to know before you even get in the plane. Things that you need to know on the ground, things that you need to demonstrate to your DPE you have a knowledge of before they would even let you get into the plane with them. The first thing that I want to point out in this first task, pilot qualifications, this is applicable for all future tasks, but for this one, there's different references. And the references relate to different parts in the FAR or the AIM or an advisory circular or the pilot handbook of aeronautical knowledge, or the airplane flying handbook. So really, like, any document related to flying that is distributed by the FAA. So the FAA is the governing agency that distributes these documents, and those are really the only documents that you need to have an awareness and understanding of in order to pass your check ride. If there are other resources that you find helpful in order to learn, because for whatever reason, you don't find it easy to learn by reading the FAA distributed documents, you could do that, but it has everything. They've created everything that you'll need to fly. So this is good because you might find, at least from what I've heard, that there are questions, that your DPE will ask you that you might not know the answer to off the top of your head, but apparently that's okay if you know where to look. So my little example that comes to mind is for basic med. If you don't know everything about basic med, but you know this advisory circular 68-1, you can answer those questions that your DPE gives you to the best of your ability. And then if they continue to press you on them, you can say, I don't know, but I know that the details are in Advisory Circular 68-1, and let me open it up and find it for you. So they'll let you do that. Okay, so we'll get into the information pieces of it right now. There's 5 different knowledge sections for this one, and it doesn't seem like a lot of information when you just skim this sheet, but we could dive pretty deep into all of them, and I kind of will be, just to show you where everything is coming from. So this first knowledge section, PA1.A.K1, 3 different pieces of it. The first is certification requirements. And essentially what that is implying is, what do you need to do in order to be eligible to even, 1, get to check ride point, the point of your check ride, and get your pilot license. So there are certain limitations there, like not everyone, is able to meet the requirements in order to get their pilot's license. There are certain things there that you have to complete in order to be eligible, and then obviously you need to show knowledge and experience. I will go into the first one, certification requirements. If you look at FAR 61-103, I have it up over to the other tab. This website is also a .gov website, so I've been using it as my source of truth. You can get the FAR AIM book, which I also like. You can bring the FAR AIM book with you for the oral exam, and I don't know if you can mark it up or not. Mine is currently marked up, and it's really helpful when it comes to studying. Again, I don't know, maybe certain DPEs allow it, certain DPEs don't, but it helps me at least kind of study. I color coordinate it and I tab it up, so there's some sort of like tactical understanding of, oh, like this part's in the beginning, this part's in the middle, this part's in the end, and it's helpful. Another recommendation I received that I started doing is to have that same FAR AIM on iPad, but there's an app version of it. You have to pay for the app version. I know that you could just look this up for free, but the app version, you're able to highlight things, you're able to take some notes, and it also updates every time a regulation is changed. So by going into the app, you're ensuring that you always have the latest information. If you have a copy of the book, like I have a copy of the 2024 book, I think it was outdated in 2023. It came out in 2023 and it was outdated apparently before or as it was being released. So for the latest regulation changes, the app is the best from what I've heard. Okay, so we'll go into this one. 61-103 eligibility requirements. In order to be eligible for your private pilot certificate, a person must first be 17 years old. We're going to skip B. C, be able to read, speak, write, and understand the English language. D, receive a logbook endorsement from an authorized instructor who, 1, conducted the training or reviewed the person's home study on the aeronautical knowledge areas listed that apply to the aircraft rating sought. So what aircraft rating are you looking for? Are you looking for single engine? Are you looking for multi-engine? Are you looking for land? Are you looking for sea? And certify that the person is prepared for the required knowledge test. So this is the first part. Knowledge test means written test. You need to do that step before you get here. Then you need to pass the knowledge test. So first your instructor needs to say, hey, you can pass the knowledge test. Then you pass the knowledge test. After that, you need to make sure that you had training in the aircraft. So people do this in all different combinations. I was flying and studying for my knowledge test at the same time. Some people study for their knowledge test, pass it, and then go into the flying portion of it. It's whatever you want, whatever you have the time, money, and energy for. Once you pass the knowledge test, then you, let's say, fly. Your instructor endorses you for a bunch of different things like solo and cross country, and then they certify that you're prepared for the required practical test, which is another name for your check ride. Then you have to meet the aeronautical experience requirements, which we will go into next. And I'm just going to go into J. It says hold a U.S. student pilot certificate, sport pilot certificate, or recreational pilot certificate. So J is a little bit, I guess, redundant, because if you're meeting the aeronautical experience requirements, part of that is getting your student pilot certificate, unless there's some other path I don't know about. But we'll go into G in a little bit more detail, because I feel like this honestly should be highlighted because there are a lot of details. So again, these are the eligibility requirements. Big ones: 17 years old, read, write, speak, understand English, pass the knowledge test, instructor endorses you to endorses you for the practical test, and you have met the aeronautical experience requirements. So the aeronautical experience requirements are, what did you need to do in the plane in terms of hours and types of flight? So things that you kind of like, your logbook asks you, how many hours did you get in different categories to show that, you know, you're sufficient in the different areas of flying. So we will go to 61-109, which is related to your aeronautical experience. So, because we are looking at an official government website, I'm going to parrot what is on this website, but I would just like to side note that I heard at a Part 61 school, you need 40 hours minimum flight time. At a Part 141 school, I've heard you need 35 hours minimum. It doesn't state it here, so I think that the cleanest answer would be to just respond with what is in 61-109 for your aeronautical experience if the DPE asks. So here it says that a person who applies for a private pilot certificate with an airplane category and single engine class rating must log at least 40 hours flight time. That's just a blanket 40 hours. It doesn't specify 91 or 141, so that's 40 hours. 20 of those hours need to be with an authorized instructor, so a CFI. 10 of those hours need to be solo. The other 10, I guess they specify some things, but they know that you need more hours than just 30 hours. I don't know anyone who's gotten their license in 40 hours. Granted, I guess I don't know too many pilots. I'd be very impressed with someone who got their license in 40 hours. I have read on some FAA forum, this is an official thing on the FAA website, that on average it takes like 75, 80 hours, but everyone is different, and I think the most important thing is always to be a safe pilot, even if it means you need more work. So that's just out there. However, in terms of requirements, what the FAA is requiring you to do is 3 hours of cross-country flight training in a single-engine airplane. So that is 3 hours of cross-country flight training that can be done with an instructor. So 3 hours cross-country. Then 3 hours of night flight, including 1 cross-country flight of over 100 nautical miles in total distance. So it could be 50 there, 50 back, and 10 takeoffs and landings to a full stop, with each landing involving in a flight in the traffic pattern at an airport. Okay, so we're getting 3 hours cross-country, then we're getting 3 hours night, including 100 nautical mile cross-country, night cross-country, and 10 takeoffs and landings at night to a full stop. Then you need 3 hours. This long paragraph means instrument. So 3 hours under the hood or with foggles. I don't know if there's another way to do that, if it's a sim or something, but 3 hours of instrument time. And then it's saying what you need to include in there. So like unusual attitudes, using nav systems, so VORs, straight and level flight, climbs, descents. Your instructor will talk through that with you. You also need to make sure that you had 3 hours of flight training, which have been performed within the preceding 2 months. So if you've been doing these things, like let's say you had your night flight, that was the last requirement, it's just making sure that there's some time frame in order. It's not saying that you need like 3 additional hours, just that you did those 3 hours within the last 2 months, because I guess a lot of people take breaks or something like that, and they want to make sure that you have this information fresh in your mind. Requirement 5 is 10 hours of that solo flight time that they were mentioning in the paragraph above, and it's asking for at least 5 hours of solo cross-country time, and one of those solo cross-country flights needs to be 150 nautical miles in total distance, with full stop landings at 3 points and one segment of the flight consisting of a straight and level distance of more than 50 nautical miles between the takeoff and landing locations. So I think of it as a triangle, 50 miles to point 1, let's say your first stop, 50 miles to your second stop, 50 miles home. And make them all, don't do touch and goes, make them a full stop, and fly in a straight line. Okay. And then it says 3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop at an airport with an operating control tower. So I don't know about other people, but those takeoffs and landings, I think for a lot of folks, come before the solo cross-country flight. But I guess if you don't fly at a towered airport, they could come after. The next part, which is B, relates to multi-engine, not applicable here. Helicopter, not applicable. Gyroplane, power lift rating, glider, airship, balloon with airborne heater, gas balloon. I'll recap what is said above, because this is the only part that pertains to the single engine land. Okay, 3 hours cross country, 3 hours night, including a night cross country, 100 nautical miles, 10 takeoff and landings to a full stop at night. 3 hours instrument. 3 of those hours, 3 hours in general, need to be made within the preceding 2 months. You need 10 hours of solo, 10 hours solo cross country. One of those cross countries needs to be a triangle. 50, 50, 50, straight lines, and then 3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop at an airport with an operating control tower. So that is 61,109. I believe that wraps up certification requirements. We'll discuss recent flight experience next. I like to think of this first small section as you want to get your license. What do you need to demonstrate to show that you are eligible to get your license? What does your logbook need to look like? What things did you need to do to get to the check ride and licensing phase? Then, let's say you have your license. Now we're looking at recent flight experience. You obviously want to keep your license. Maybe you want to start flying with passengers, and maybe you want to work on your instrument rating or other licenses. What do you need to log? That's kind of the question, the groupings of questions that we're going for here. So, recent flight experience. I'm gonna look at my notes. Carrying passengers is a really big thing. Your license never expires. So let's say I get my private pilot license on January 1st. of this year, let's say I got it on January 1st of 2025, it never expires. So unlike a driver's license that expires and is no longer valid to be used, let's say, when you go to travel or something like that, your private pilot license doesn't expire, but there are points where you shouldn't be flying legally, even though you have it and it doesn't expire. So there are two kind of things that are relevant there. The first one, and I guess this is just more broad, if you want to fly as a solo person, you need to make sure that every 2 years, so the word is biennial. You might see the word biannual with an A in a lot of the texts that the FAA releases, but the meaning is actually the meaning of biennial. Every 2 years, you need to make sure that you fly with a CFI who takes a note in your logbook, who writes down that they flew with you in your logbook. Legally, this is the requirement. Should you do this? I don't know. If you feel confident in your abilities, I don't think it's recommended. But every 2 years, in order to stay current, the DPE might ask about the difference between currency and proficiency. I think that most of the time this is what they're alluding to when it comes to the flight review. But every 2 years, you'll do 1 hour ground and then 1 hour in the sky. This is not applicable if you're working on a rating. So if you're working on, let's say, your instrument rating immediately after, and you get that rating within 2 years, from that day of your check ride, you have another 2 years. So that's the first thing that I wanted to note in recent flight experience is every 2 years, you need a biennial flight review with the CFI. The second thing that's really important, and this could come pretty much immediately after you get your license, is I'm assuming that most people want to carry passengers, and there are some limitations on when you could carry passengers legally. There's a difference between carrying passengers during the day and carrying passengers at night. So if you carry passengers during the day, you need to make sure that within the preceding 90 days, you make 3 takeoffs and landings of the same class, category, type aircraft, 3 takeoffs and landings within the preceding 90 days. If you're carrying passengers at night, here the definition of night is 1 hour after sunset and 1 hour before sunrise. You need to make sure that you make those 3 takeoffs and landings to a full stop. So again, it's always 3 takeoffs and landings. At night, it's to a full stop to carry passengers. Also, if you're in a tail wheel, I think regardless, you need to make sure those are to a full stop. I'm gonna look at my notes and we'll look at FAR 6157 just so I can show you what that FAR looks like. Okay, recent flight experience. Okay, at least 3 takeoffs and landings within the preceding 90 days. Category, class, and type. A class or type rating is required. And then it says the thing about the tail wheel, that those takeoffs and landings need to be made to a full stop as well. Then they discuss night takeoffs and landings. Same thing here, it needs to be made to a full stop. It's pretty straightforward. Then we'll go into record keeping. So a very common question that I've heard is, do you need to log all of your flights in your logbook? The answer is no, but there's a caveat there. There are certain things that you do need to log. So you don't need to log every flight, You do need to log your biannual flight review. Otherwise, it's kind of like your license is suspended and you're flying on a license that isn't valid. You also need to log flights if you are working towards another rating or another license. So just like we're logging flights for this license, it is in the best interest to log flights for another rating or again license. If you just have your private pilot license and you want to fly to and from a family member's house a couple 100 miles away a few times a year, and that is like your main purpose, that's what you want to do, you don't have to log those flights. But there are certain instances where you do need to log them. I will find the FAR requirement because there are some additional details. So that's 6151. And the title is Pilot Logbooks. So you do need to log time if you want a certificate rating or flight review. So that was mentioned before. This is part B, is what you need to write in your logbook entries. If you have a logbook, like the ones that you buy online, or if you use ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot, it'll ask you these questions. So you need like the date, the aircraft, where you departed, where you landed, the conditions of flight, and then if anyone signed off on it. So that's record keeping. It's not super obvious, but there's one other topic that is lumped into record keeping, and that is when you need to show documentation to government officials. That is listed in I here. It says the presentation of required documents. Here it says persons must present their pilot certificate, medical certificate, logbook, or any other record required by this part for inspection upon a reasonable request by the administrator. So that means the FAA, an authorized rep of the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. They're a team of people who investigate accidents that happen in the United States. They don't just do aviation accidents, but obviously aviation accidents are a big one. And then any federal, state, or local law enforcement officer. And then it says what you need to show those people. So your logbook, your student pilot certificate. I also like to say your medical certificate. I think that's applicable here. You need a medical certificate in order to fly. It's also good to have, any other documentation that you have on you, but I would say it's your pilot logbook, your student pilot certificate, your medical certificate. That wraps up PA 1.A.K1, certification requirements. What do you need? You need to be 17, read, write, speak English, pass your written test, certain aeronautical knowledge. You need to have 3 hours cross country, 3 hours night, 10 takeoffs, landings at night, 100 nautical mile cross country at night. You need to have 10 hours solo, recent flight experience. You don't need to log everything. You do need to log your 30 takeoffs and landings to carry passengers within the preceding 90 days at day. Those 3 takeoffs and landings need to be made to a full stop at night. Night is 1 hour after sunset to 1 hour before sunrise. You need to log your biannual flight review and any flights that are used towards further ratings or licenses. Record keeping, same thing. You don't need to log everything. You do need to keep record of your flights that make sure that you are flying legally, and you need to keep your student pilot certificate on you. You need to keep your logbook with your endorsements as a student pilot. You need to have your medical certificate. Okay, we'll go into PA 1.A.K2, privileges and limitations. So this one is asking this question, this knowledge section is asking, what privileges do you have as a private pilot? Like, what can you do now that you have your license? And what are your limitations? So you can't do everything. What can you not do? I will go into 61.113. Okay, your privileges and limitations. So the really big limitation that I think is probably the most important is you can't fly for compensation or hire. It sucks when people ask if, they can comp you, like pay for your flight, and you fly them somewhere that they really want to go to, like it's a service that you're offering them and you want to do it because you want to build hours. But as a private pilot, that is not legal, and the FAA would get you in trouble if you did that. So you cannot fly for compensation or hire. There is some money that you could accept, but you can't offer your services to people with a private pilot license. So then there's some caveats here where it says a private pilot may, for compensation or hire, act as pilot in command of an aircraft in connection with any business or employment if the flight is only incidental to that business or employment and the aircraft does not carry any passengers or property for compensation or hire. The way that I think of this is, let's say you're based in somewhere in New Jersey and you have an office in Western Pennsylvania, or any part of Pennsylvania, and you normally drive your car, let's say 200 miles, you work there for a couple days for a meeting, and then you drive your car back and your company reimburses you for the mileage and gas on your car. And now you have your private pilot license. Let's say you also bought a plane or you are renting a plane, but you have your private pilot license and your employer is going to reimburse you anyways. It's not related to your business. It's not like you're flying executives over for this meeting, but you prefer that as a mode of transportation, and otherwise you would be driving your car, which you can totally do, but now you have your private pilot license. Your company's reimbursing you anyways. They can reimburse you for that plane if it's only incidental to that business or employment and it does not carry any passengers or property for compensation or hire. It's incidental, so it's not like a necessary part of your job. You're not flying people because that is your job. You're using it as, again, a mode of transportation to do the thing that you need to for your job. And you're not carrying any passengers or property for compensation or hire. So you're not bringing people over and they're paying you type of thing because you're bringing them. Okay. C. This is a big one. Pro rata share are great words to remember. You may not pay less than them. And pro rata share is basically take how many people are in the plane. Well, first, add up fuel, oil, airport expenditures, and rental fees. Add up everything. Let's say it is $600. And there are 3 people in the plane, including yourself. So you, someone to the side of you, someone in the back seat. There's 3 people, cost $600 to rent this plane. divide by 3, you each pay $200. That is legal. You can pay as the pilot more than $200, but you cannot pay less than $200. Okay. Then there are more caveats. A private pilot may act as pilot in command of a charitable, nonprofit, or community event flight if the sponsor and pilot comply with the requirements. You may be reimbursed for aircraft operating expenses that are directly related to search and rescue operations, provided the expenses involve only fuel, oil, airport expenditures, or rental fees. And it's under the control of state, local, or federal agency or an organization that conducts search and rescue operations. So I guess the benefit there is you get to log flight time, but you don't have to pay even the pro rata share. There are more. You could be an aircraft salesman. You have to have at least 200 logged flight hours, and you may demonstrate an aircraft in flight to a prospective buyer. You can show someone how the plane that you're selling works, and you can log a little bit of time for doing that. Then there's more. A private pilot who meets the requirements of 6169 may act as pilot in command of an aircraft towing a glider or powered ultralight vehicle. Flight test. There are more details here. I'm not going to go into all of them. You can go into all of them if you want. Privilege, you can now fly a plane legally. You can go to an airport, a school, a place that rents planes, a friend, and you can ask if you can take the plane up, and legally you are allowed to do that. The limitations are you can't fly for compensation or hire. You may not pay less than the pro rata share of that aircraft, and there are some nuances which are outlined in 61113. The next section so those are privileges and limitations. That wraps up K2. K3, medical certificates, class expiration, privileges, and temporary disqualifications. There are 3 classes of medical certificates. You have first class, second class, and third class. That is important to know. You can have a certain medical certificate with different privileges. So you can have a first class medical certificate, time could pass, and the thing that you are allowed to do is access third class medical privileges. It is dependent on your age. So if you are under 40 or over 40, and I will go into them. So that is 6123. And then we'll talk about basic med. So medical certificates. I am going to look at this chart. This chart, I try to remember it. It's been a little bit of time since I last looked at it, but I really think that if you can map out this chart in your head, it's easier than reading a bunch of words and knowing things. You can kind of go where you need to in your head and say like, oh, I'm under 40, I have a first class medical certificate, this many months passed, what privileges do I have? So I will start saying with this. A first class medical certificate, you have the most privileges. If you have your ATP license, you have a first class medical certificate. If you have your second class medical certificate, that is kind of like paired with your commercial license. And your third class medical certificate, to me, is paired with your private pilot license. A lot of people will get still a first class medical certificate it's a little bit harder, let's say, to get medically, but it ensures that you can do more things. But if you don't have your airline transport pilot license, it doesn't even matter. Okay, so if you have your first class medical certificate and you are under the age of 40, you have 12 months to exercise your first class privileges. If you are over 40, you have 6 months to exercise your first class medical privileges. So let's say you're flying on a United Airlines flight and you have 2 pilots at the front who are both over 40 years old, let's say. In your head, just know that every 6 months, they need to go to the doctor and they need to re-up their first class medical certificate, because otherwise their privileges get knocked down and they have their ATP license and they need it in order to do their job. If they're under 40, then every year they're good for a year. I would also like to point out that 1 year and 6 months is probably not the best language to use. Here it says the 12th month after the month of the date of the examination. So let's say you get your examination done January 5th of 2025. You don't have 365 days. Your next medical certificate would expire the 12th month after the month of the date shown on the medical certificate. So my understanding of that is you would have until January 31st of the next year. Let me confirm that. So that is your first class medical certificate. That is to exercise your first class privileges, which are to be a PIC holding an airline transport pilot certificate and to fly planes that require you to have your airline transport pilot certificate. Let's say you don't fly those planes. Let's say you don't have your airline transport pilot certificate. Then your privileges, if you are under 40, for that first year, you could exercise your first class privileges. So for 12 months, you exercise your first class privileges. After that, if you are under the age of 40, you get dropped down to a third class privileges. So you hold the first class medical certificate, exercising third class privileges for the remaining 48 months. That's why it says 60 months. You have to subtract those 12 months that you were exercising first class privileges for, or could have been accessing first class privileges for. If you are 40 or older, you have 24 months. So you subtract 6 because you were using first class privileges, let's say, for the first 6 months. For the remaining 18 months, you are now able to access third class privileges. And that's what it means by recreational pilot certificate. Okay, now we're moving on to a second class medical certificate. If you are of any age here, you can access those second class medical privileges for 12 months, 12 calendar months. After that, under the age of 40, you can access those second class privileges for 48 months. If you're over the age of 40, you can access those second class privileges for 24 months. Remember that you need to subtract 12 from the 60 and the 24. Now we're looking at third class privileges. Under the age of 40, you have 60 months. At 60 months for third class privileges, whether you're holding a first, second, or third class medical certificate. If you're over the age of 40, you have 24 months. It's 24 months to hold those privileges for the third, second, and first class medical certificate too. You can hold a certain medical certificate and you can exercise different privileges. They're not mutually exclusive, You need to be aware of ages if you are under 40 or over 40. I don't know if there are certain nuances, like let's say you're 39 and your birthday's coming up. I don't know what happens there. But if that is your case, I would recommend asking those questions. So it seems confusing at first. I like this chart. Certain people don't. There's some important numbers. 40 is a big one, under 40, over 40. Under 40, I think is 60. Over 40, I think of 24. First class medical certificate, I think of 12 and 6. Second class medical certificate, I think of 12. Third class medical certificate, I think of 60 and 24. It's a lot of numbers, but it's repetitive. So in whatever way that helps you understand that, it's just one of those things you need to understand. The most important thing that I think the DPE will really ask you on, if you don't remember something, it's fine, but just know what your privileges are with the medical certificate that you have. So obviously know your age, know what kind of medical certificate you have, when the privileges are changing, and when they expire. So that's class, that's expiration, that's privileges. Remember that privileges are not mutually exclusive with the medical certificate that you have. You could have a first class medical certificate and you could exercise third class privileges. Temporary disqualifications. In my notes, I just have that you should notify your AME, your medical examiner, of medical changes. So if you take a new medication or something happens to you, like you break something, you need to let your AME know. Those are, again, temporary disqualifications. It's not permanent. There are certain disqualifications that I guess could be permanent, like certain disorders. I'm gonna look up private pilot temporary disqualifications. Okay, so this is what Google says. Take this with a grain of salt. This is their AI. Heart conditions, coronary heart disease, myocardial infarction, cardiac valve replacement, neurological disorders like epilepsy, migraines, if you have ADHD, if you have a personality disorder, if you have substance-related disorders, I guess diabetes, unexplained loss of consciousness. So this is the FAA website. This is legitimate. If you have these medical conditions, that is a disqualifier. I don't think it means that it's impossible to get your license. I think that it means it's a little harder and you need to prove that this would not affect your flying or your safety or the safety of others. Temporary disqualifications are different, I know. I think that they want to know everything that happens. I would just recommend consulting with your CFI or someone that you trust if you need to get a surgery done or something like that. Documents required to exercise private pilot privileges, K4. So 3 big things here. This isn't a long topic. Your pilot cert. It's a cute little card. It'll come in the mail. When you submit online, you'll have a paper version of it that you have to print out. But it's like a cute little card, the size of your driver's license. And it'll say your name and it'll say what kind of privileges you have, like if you're a student pilot or a private pilot, if you have your instrument rating, stuff like that. Make sure to have a photo ID, driver's license or passport, and your medical certificate. If you're a student pilot, make sure to have a logbook on you. We're gonna go back to 6151. Pilot logbooks. We were in this before, and I guess we did touch on it already, but I will show you again just So you can remember presentation of required documents, pilot certificate, medical certificate, logbook. I like to add a government issued photo ID. I don't see it here. But in my notes I add it. I guess it's better to be safe, but unless someone can point out that you need it here or that it's not listed, I guess that point could be argued. So you can read this and interpret it on your own if you feel like you need that or not. Okay, the last topic is basic med. Basic med is an alternative to the medical certificates that we discussed before. If you get a first, second, or third class medical certificate, you need to go to a special type of doctor, so an AME. I don't know if they can do other things outside of that, but they're not just like your family's regular physician. They're an AME. They specialize, I guess, in aviation somehow. Basic med is a little bit different. There are certain privileges, so we'll talk about the privileges first. The privileges are you can fly an airplane. You can own an airplane, you can fly people around. You don't need to obviously go through the AME process and have a regular medical certificate. But there are certain limitations there. So one is that the plane that you're flying can only have 6 seats in it, 6 occupants. When you subtract yourself, that means that you can carry 5 passengers. The airplane also needs to have a max weight of 600 pounds, and you can only fly 250 knots below 18,000 MSL, and you can't fly for comp or higher. So I think basic med, the perk of it is it really lets you access private pilot privileges without meeting certain criteria. I think that they're a little bit more strict. Like the AME is a little bit more strict than your family physician, and maybe there are some disqualifiers when you get a regular medical certificate that don't disqualify you under basic med. So in order to get basic med, you've had to had a medical certificate sometime after 2006. You need to hold a US driver's license. You need to answer health questions and a physical from a state licensed physician, and they fill out this checklist. I think I have more detailed notes. Maybe not there, but we could go into the advisory circular. So the advisory circular is here, 68-1. FAA website, basic med. It looks like this. It's a document, 35 pages long. It tells you details about basic med. So this is a summary, and I'll review it. What do you need? Again, US driver's license. Held a medical certificate at any point after 2006. Answer the health questions on the comprehensive medical examination checklist. Get your physical examination by any state licensed physician and have that physician complete it. So my understanding is there are some questions for you on the CMEC, and then there are some questions for your physician. And then you also need to take this online course, and you need to attest and consent to the National Driver Register. And you need to have that receipt that you completed the course. These are your privileges: no more than 5 passengers, 600 pounds max certified takeoff weight, fly an aircraft that is authorized to carry no more than 6 occupants. So even if you only have 5 passengers, but your aircraft is authorized to carry 12, you are not able to fly that. 250 knots or less, 18,000 feet MSL or less, no comp or higher. So again, equivalent to recreational pilot license. And then let's say you have basic med, right? What do you need in order to maintain your privileges? Every 48 months, you need to make sure that you have that questionnaire thing filled out. You need to be treated by a physician for medical conditions that affect the safety of your flight. And within the past 24 months, you need the course completed. So every 2 years, let's say, you need the online course. You need to attest to things, you need to have it printed out. And every 4 years, you need the physical examination. I'm gonna look up to see if we can see what the CMEC looks like. These are more details. You know, there's certain things here like, oh, is this it? These are the sections for the individual to complete on the CMEC. They want your medical history. They want to know if you wear contact lenses. Do you have any prescription medications? Have you been, to the hospital? And then this is what your physician looks at. They look at your eyes, your ears, your heart, your skin, your spine. And they just want to make sure that you're in good shape to fly, essentially. I don't know, because I haven't done basic med, I don't know how it's different than going to the AME. My AME didn't do very much. They looked at my eyes, they tested my hearing, asked me a couple questions, and I was good to go. I didn't do an EKG. Some people do the EKG, but again, I'm sure that basic med, I've heard of a lot of people use it. I'm sure that there's a lot of good things that come out of basic med. The most important thing is there are limitations: 5 passengers, 600 pounds max gross takeoff weight, 250 knots, below 18,000 feet MSL, no comp or higher. You need to complete the course every 2 years, 24 months, and the physician needs to sign off every 48 months. So this is the knowledge portion of Task A, Pilot Qualifications. We'll just touch on risk management a little bit. The next thing asks R1 for risk proficiency versus currency. I'm just trying to think of questions that would spark the DPE to ask about this. And they might say something along the lines of, you did your biannual flight review 18 months ago, and your friend wants you to take them on a tour of New York City and see the Statue of Liberty at 8 p.m. and the sun sets, let's say, at 6. What do you have to do legally? And that means currency. Currency is like legal. And what would you do as an individual to be proficient, to feel safe? So I think of currency as legally, proficiency as safety. And you could say something like, if it's been 18 months since I last flew, I know that I'm still current when it comes to my license. Do I feel proficient? No. I might want to go with the CFI. I might want to take that route with them, get refreshed on the comms, because it's a class Bravo and it's really congested airspace, and I study the diagrams, but I want to be safe. And you might say something along the lines of, my friend wants to fly at night, so I know that I need to do 3 takeoffs and landings at night, and they need to be a full stop sometime before the 90 days before we're going to go flying. But maybe preferably I would want to do that less than 2 weeks before we go flying, because we're going to be flying at night. So I don't know, whatever you feel comfortable with, but you could say something along those lines and signify to your DPE that you know the difference between proficiency, which my connotation of proficiency is safety, versus currency, which is what you have to do to fly legally. And then it says flying unfamiliar aircraft or operating with unfamiliar flight displays, systems, and avionics. So I fly in the Cessna 172S, they're steam gauges. It's a 6-pack, and I enjoy it. I can fly well in it, but I've flown before in a G1000 because that was the only plane available to rent. And I was so disoriented. My flight instructor would ask me to put the power at 2100 or climb to a certain altitude or turn to a certain heading and dial a certain frequency. And it took me a couple of seconds more to be able to do that. So let's say you have your private pilot license, you only fly Steam, and you want to rent a G1000 or an airplane with different avionics or a different plane altogether. The recommendation here, most likely, is to fly with the CFI first. You know, get familiar with the plane, and then you could take it up alone or with passengers. And skills. Apply requirements to act as PSE under VFR in a scenario given by the evaluator. So they'll just give you a bunch of scenarios where you're pilot in command, which means that you're the decision maker under visual flight rules, and they'll ask you what decisions you would make if you were in those scenarios. So that wraps up Task A, Pilot Qualifications. I was very excited to create this video. I hope it was helpful to you. I think that we talked through everything. If there's any questions that you have, you can message in the comments and someone will try to answer it, I'm sure. The pilot community is small and we should all be helping each other to be better pilots and make aviation safe and fun, but mostly safe. So stay tuned for Task B, Airworthiness Requirements. I might change the format of these videos a little bit to bring in some other people or diagrams and stuff like that. But again, thanks for watching this video. Thanks for listening to this. And I will see you next time.